Electra never imagined that one simple question asked in passing would unravel her entire understanding of Dylan's past. But that is exactly what happened the moment a familiar name surfaced during an otherwise ordinary afternoon at Forrester Creations, because what began as idle curiosity quickly transformed into a shocking journey into secrets buried for decades, secrets that would leave Electra reeling, questioning everything she thought she knew about the man she was falling for, as well as the powerful family ties that quietly control so much of Los Angeles. And as the truth emerged piece by piece, it became painfully clear that Dylan's mother was not just someone from his past, but someone deeply intertwined with the legacy of the Forrester family itself, a revelation that would send shockwaves through every relationship connected to him. Because Electra's discovery didn't come from Dylan directly, but from an overheard conversation between two longtime employees discussing an old scandal involving a woman who disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. A woman whose name Electra recognized instantly from a photograph she had once seen in Dylan's apartment, tucked away and hidden as though it were something shameful. And when Electra finally confronted Dylan about it, expecting denial or perhaps a reluctant confession, she instead encountered a look of pure fear in his eyes. The kind of fear that only comes from someone who has spent a lifetime running from the truth. And in that moment, she realized that whatever secret Dylan was keeping, it was far bigger and more dangerous than she could have imagined, because Dylan's mother was none other than a woman whose past scandal nearly destroyed one of the most powerful families in Los Angeles. A woman who had been erased from public memory, but not from the hearts of those she left behind. And as Electra pushed for answers, Dylan finally admitted that his mother had once been romantically involved with a major Forrester patriarch, a relationship that had resulted in betrayal, heartbreak, and a child whose existence was never meant to be acknowledged. And although Dylan stopped short of confirming the full truth, the implications were devastating, because if what Electra suspected was true, Dylan wasn't just connected to the Forrester family. He was part of it. And this possibility terrified him because he had spent his entire life believing that his mother was abandoned and discarded to protect the reputation of powerful men who never took responsibility for their actions. And Electra could see the pain etched into Dylan's memories as he described growing up with a mother who carried both pride and bitterness, who warned him never to trust the wealthy elite because they would always protect themselves at the expense of people like them. And yet fate had cruelly brought Dylan right back into the orbit of the very family that may have destroyed his mother's life. And as Electra processed this stunning revelation, she struggled with her own conflicting emotions. Torn between her growing love for Dylan and her loyalty to the Forrester world she had become a part of, knowing that if the truth came out, it could shatter alliances, expose old betrayals, and reopen wounds that had never truly healed. Because Dylan's mother wasn't just a forgotten lover. She was a woman who had once dreamed of a future that was ripped away from her when she became inconvenient. And as Electra dug deeper, she learned that Dylan's mother had mysteriously vanished years ago, leaving behind rumors of exile, hush money, and threats, with no clear answers as to whether she left by choice or was forced to disappear. And this only fueled Electra's determination to uncover the full truth, even as Dylan begged her to let the past stay buried, fearing that exposing his mother's identity would only bring pain and chaos into their lives. But Electra couldn't ignore the injustice, especially when she realized that powerful figures within the Forrester family might already know who Dylan truly was and had chosen to stay silent. And when Electra finally confronted one of the family elders with her suspicions, the reaction she received confirmed everything, because the stunned silence, the trembling hands, and the whispered insistence that some truths are better left undiscovered told Electra that she had struck a nerve that had been protected for decades. And as the weight of this secret settled over her, she realized that Dylan's existence represented a living reminder of a past betrayal, a child born of a love that was never allowed to survive. And the deeper Electra went, the more she uncovered a web of manipulation, power, and control that extended far beyond Dylan's mother, revealing that decisions made long ago had ripple effects still being felt today. And when Electra finally told Dylan that she knew the full truth, including the identity of his mother and her connection to the Forrester dynasty, his reaction was a heartbreaking mix of relief and devastation, because on one hand, he no longer had to carry the burden alone, but on the other hand, The confirmation of his worst fears meant that everything his mother had warned him about was true, and as Dylan grappled with the reality of being the son of a man who never acknowledged him, Electra watched the man she loved struggle with anger, grief, and a longing for answers that might never come. And the tension between them intensified as Electra pushed him to confront the family and demand the truth, while Dylan resisted, terrified that doing so would dishonor his mother's sacrifice and expose him to rejection all over again. And as word of the secret began to spread, whispers echoed through Forrester creations, old enemies resurfaced, and alliances were tested. Because the revelation of Dylan's mother threatened to rewrite family history, forcing those involved to confront their past, actions, and the damage they caused. And when an unexpected letter surfaced, allegedly written by Dylan's mother before her disappearance, detailing the emotional toll of her relationship and the painful choice she made to protect her son from a life of scandal, the truth became impossible to ignore, because the letter revealed that she had willingly stepped away to ensure Dylan would grow up free from the shadow of betrayal, even though it meant sacrificing her own happiness. And Electra, moved to tears by the strength and heartbreak in the letter, realized that Dylan's mother was far more than a footnote in a scandal. She was a woman who loved fiercely and paid the ultimate price for trusting the wrong people. And as Electra encouraged Dylan to reclaim his story and honor his mother's legacy, the couple faced mounting pressure from those who feared what would happen if the truth became public, with veiled threats, emotional manipulation, and desperate attempts to control the narrative. But Electra refused to be silenced, believing that the truth deserved to be told no matter the cost. And as the confrontation finally came, with Dylan standing face to face with the man who may have been his biological father, emotions exploded, years of guilt and regret poured out, and long-buried confessions surfaced, revealing that fear, ambition, and pride had driven choices that destroyed lives. And while the encounter did not bring instant healing, it marked the beginning of accountability, because for the first time, Dylan's existence was acknowledged, his mother's name spoken without shame, and her story given the respect it deserved. And as the fallout continued to ripple through the Forrester family, Electra stood by Dylan's side, knowing that their future would never be simple, but also knowing that love built on truth was stronger than any secret. And as Los Angeles buzzed with speculation, one thing became clear. The shocking identity of Dylan's mother was not just a revelation, it was a reckoning, one that would forever change the lives of everyone involved, proving once again that on the bold and the beautiful, the past never stays buried, and every secret eventually demands to be seen. As the revelation continued to reverberate through every corner of Los Angeles, Electra found herself increasingly isolated, caught between the love she felt for Dylan and the suffocating pressure exerted by those who believed the past should remain untouched. Because once Dylan's mother's name was spoken aloud, it was as though a dam had broken, unleashing decades of suppressed guilt, fear, and resentment. And people who had once pretended ignorance suddenly remembered details they claimed to have forgotten, while others went to great lengths to rewrite history in ways that painted themselves as victims rather than architects of the pain that followed. And Electra quickly realized that uncovering the truth had made her a target, not just emotionally, but professionally, as subtle warnings began to surface in the form of lost opportunities, cold stares, and whispered conversations that abruptly ended whenever she entered a room. Yet she refused to back down, driven by the conviction that Dylan's mother deserved justice even if she could never speak for herself. And Dylan, though grateful for Electra's unwavering support, struggled internally as memories from his childhood resurfaced with renewed intensity, recalling moments when his mother would fall silent at the mention of certain names, or stare at old photographs with an expression that mixed longing and sorrow. And for the first time, he understood that those moments were not signs of weakness, but acts of restraint, because she had been carrying the weight of a truth she believed would destroy him if revealed too soon. And as Dylan wrestled with anger toward the man who abandoned them and the system that protected him, he also grappled with an unexpected sense of grief for the life he never had, a life where his mother might have been celebrated rather than erased. And this internal conflict began to strain his relationship with Electra, as he oscillated between wanting to expose everything and wanting to disappear, fearing that no amount of truth could undo the damage already done. and Electra, sensing his turmoil, tried to remind him that his mother's strength lived on through him, that her sacrifices were not meant to imprison him in silence, but to empower him to choose a different path. Yet even as she spoke those words, she questioned her own role in all of this, wondering whether her determination to reveal the truth was motivated by justice or by her own need for clarity in a world built on illusions. And as the tension mounted, an unexpected figure stepped forward with new information, someone who had been close to Dylan's mother during the height of the scandal, revealing that her disappearance was not as voluntary as many had claimed, because while she did leave Los Angeles under the guise of starting a new life, it was only after being cornered and presented with an ultimatum that made it clear her presence would never be tolerated, and this revelation sent shockwaves through Electra and Dylan alike, because it reframed everything they thought they knew about her final choices, transforming her departure from an act of quiet sacrifice into one of forced exile. And the implications of this new truth were devastating, suggesting that powerful hands had not only erased her from public life, but had also controlled the narrative to absolve themselves of guilt. And when Electra attempted to bring this information to light, she was met with resistance so fierce it bordered on intimidation, including legal threats and thinly veiled warnings about the consequences of continuing her investigation. But instead of silencing her, these tactics only strengthened her resolve, because Electra had seen firsthand how fear had destroyed Dylan's mother, and she refused to allow it to claim another victim. And as Dylan learned more about the circumstances surrounding his mother's disappearance, his anger transformed into a quiet determination, realizing that honoring her legacy meant refusing to accept the lies that had defined his existence. And this shift marked a turning point, as Dylan agreed to confront the truth publicly, not out of revenge, but out of a need for acknowledgement. And when he announced his intention to seek answers openly, the reaction was immediate and explosive, because the possibility of scandal threatened to unravel carefully curated images and reputations that had taken lifetimes to build. And as media interest grew, old wounds reopened across the Forrester family, with members divided over whether to deny the claims or finally face the consequences of past actions. And Electra found herself at the center of this storm, blamed by some for stirring chaos and praised by others for her courage. Yet she remained focused on Dylan, whose emotional state became increasingly fragile as the weight of public scrutiny combined with deeply personal grief. And during a quiet moment away from the chaos, Dylan confessed his deepest fear to Electra, admitting that he was terrified of becoming defined solely by his origins, of being reduced to a scandal rather than seen as the man he had worked so hard to become. And Electra reassured him that while his past might explain parts of him, it would never dictate his future, because identity was not inherited but earned through choices. And as their bond deepened under the pressure, it became clear that their relationship had become a symbol of defiance against the culture of silence that had protected powerful figures for too long. And when another letter surfaced, this one written by Dylan's mother during her final days in Los Angeles, it revealed her growing awareness that the truth would eventually come out, and her hope that when it did, her son would be strong enough to face it without shame. And reading her words, Dylan broke down in a way he never had before, finally allowing himself to mourn not just the mother he lost, but the life she was denied. And this emotional release marked the beginning of healing, even as the fallout continued to intensify. Because the closer Dylan came to reclaiming his story, the more desperate certain individuals became to stop him, resorting to manipulation, guilt, and appeals to loyalty, insisting that exposing the truth would only bring pain to innocent people. But Dylan countered that the pain already existed. It had simply been ignored, and as he prepared to speak publicly, Electra stood by his side, fully aware that doing so could permanently alter her own future, yet unwilling to abandon him now, because she understood that love meant standing together even when the ground beneath them was crumbling. And when the day finally arrived for Dylan to share his truth, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and dread, as generations of secrets hovered in the air waiting to be confronted. And as Dylan spoke about his mother, her courage, her exile, and the injustice she endured, the room fell silent, because for the first time, the story was being told by the one person who had the most to lose. And as tears flowed and defenses cracked, it became clear that this was no longer about scandal but about accountability. And while not everyone was ready to accept the truth, the act of speaking it marked a shift that could not be undone. And as Electra watched Dylan reclaim his voice, she realized that the shock of discovering his mother's identity had evolved into something far more powerful, a reckoning that challenged the very foundation of the world they lived in. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was undeniable: the legacy of Dylan's mother would no longer be hidden in shadows, because through her son and the woman who refused to stay silent, her story had finally been given the light it deserved, ensuring that no matter how fiercely some tried to bury the past, its truth would continue to rise, reshaping lives, relationships, and destinies on the bold and the beautiful. As the dust from Dylan's public revelation began to settle, the emotional consequences proved far more complicated than anyone anticipated, because while some offered sympathy and quiet apologies, others retreated into denial, clinging to carefully constructed versions of the past that allowed them to sleep at night. And Electra quickly learned that truth did not automatically bring peace. It brought confrontation, resistance, and uncomfortable reflection, especially as Dylan became the unspoken reminder of choices people would rather forget. And although he was finally acknowledged, the absence of genuine remorse from certain individuals cut deeply, leaving him to wonder whether justice was even possible in a world that rewarded silence over accountability. And this emotional limbo took a toll on his relationship with Electra, not because their love weakened, but because grief has a way of isolating even the strongest hearts, and there were moments when Dylan withdrew, lost in thoughts of his mother's final years, imagining her loneliness, her fear, and the quiet strength it must have taken to walk away from everything she knew. And Electra, watching him struggle, feared that the weight of the past might eventually pull him away from her. Yet she refused to abandon hope, believing that healing was a process, not an event. And as tensions continued to simmer within the Forrester family, subtle shifts began to occur as younger generations questioned the decisions made before them and whether loyalty to legacy should outweigh responsibility to truth. And this generational divide ignited new conflicts, with some arguing that reopening old wounds served no purpose, while others insisted that wounds left untreated never truly heal. And at the center of this debate stood Dylan, unwilling to be weaponized by either side, determined instead to define his future on his own terms. And when an unexpected legal inquiry surfaced, hinting that Dylan's mother may have been coerced into silence through unethical means, panic rippled through those who had once felt untouchable, because the possibility of consequences, even symbolic ones, threatened to dismantle the illusion of control they had maintained for decades. And Electra found herself once again under scrutiny, accused of pushing Dylan toward destruction rather than empowerment, accusations that stung deeply but only reaffirmed her belief that love sometimes requires courage rather than comfort. And as Dylan faced these accusations head-on, he surprised even himself by choosing compassion over vengeance, acknowledging the damage done without allowing it to consume him, because he finally understood that honoring his mother did not mean living in perpetual anger. It meant refusing to let her suffering define his entire existence. And this realization marked a profound shift, as Dylan began speaking not just about loss, but about resilience, transforming his narrative from one of abandonment into one of survival. And as Electra watched this transformation unfold, she realized that the shocking discovery that once threatened to destroy everything had instead become the catalyst for growth, forcing truths into the open and creating space for change, however imperfect. And while not every relationship could be repaired and not every apology would ever come, the silence that once suffocated Dylan's mother no longer held power, because her story now lived through those willing to speak it. And as the future stretched uncertainly before them, Electra and Dylan chose to move forward together, aware that the past would always be a part of them, but no longer willing to let it dictate their fate. And in the end, the revelation of Dylan's mother's identity did more than shock. It exposed the fragile foundations upon which so many lives have been built, reminding everyone that truth, no matter how delayed, has a way of demanding recognition. And on the bold and the beautiful, where love and betrayal often walk hand in hand, this reckoning proved once again that even the most carefully buried secrets eventually rise, reshaping destinies and redefining what it truly means to be bold.